Most people know James Garner as the charming cowboy from Maverick or the tough yet witty detective from the Rockford Files. But before the fame, before Hollywood even knew his name, his life looked nothing like a movie star's. Garner was born during the Great Depression, a time when survival wasn't guaranteed. His family barely scraped by, and when he was just 5 years old, tragedy struck. His mother died. Hey, if you're enjoying this trip down memory lane, don't forget to click subscribe. It's completely free, and this way you won't miss any of our next stories from the stars you grew up with, leaving James and his brothers in the care of a father who struggled to hold everything together. Instead of a childhood filled with warmth and stability, James endured hardship, loneliness, and a desperate need to fend for himself. He later admitted that his father's remarriage made things even harder. Life at home became tense and painful, and James spent much of his youth drifting, taking odd jobs, even hitchhiking across the country just to escape. Imagine this: a future Hollywood legend sleeping on floors, working in oil fields, and pulling scraps of food together while most of America was still recovering from economic collapse. That rough beginning could have broken him. Instead, it carved out the qualities that made him unforgettable: grit, independence, and a quiet strength that audiences would one day see on screen. Garner wasn't acting when he played the relatable everyman. He was that man. And that's what made him so dangerously appealing. But as tough as his childhood was, it was only the warm-up for something even more life-changing. A war that almost ended his story before it began. Before Hollywood fame, James Garner put his life on the line. At just 18, he joined the U.S. Army and was sent to fight in the Korean War, one of the bloodiest, most unforgiving conflicts of the 20th century. Picture this: a teenager from Oklahoma, barely out of high school, suddenly dropped into freezing trenches with bullets flying overhead and explosions lighting up the night sky. Yeah, Garner wasn't just acting tough, he had to be tough. And he paid the price. During combat, he was hit twice, earning 2 Purple Hearts, one from shrapnel wounds, another when enemy fire nearly ended his life. Years later, Garner rarely spoke about the war, but when he did, it wasn't with bragging or bravado. It was with a kind of haunted honesty. He said combat left him scarred, not just physically, but mentally. The battlefield gave him a sense of discipline and perspective, but it also forced him to grow up faster than anyone should. And here's the twist most fans don't know: that soldier's discipline became the secret weapon that made him such a powerful actor. Garner didn't walk into Hollywood with wide eyes and naivety. He walked in as a survivor who had already faced death. That gave him an edge, a presence, and a confidence that no acting school could teach. And soon, that same edge would transform him from a nameless war veteran into one of the most magnetic stars Hollywood had ever seen. Hollywood is full of overnight sensations, but James Garner's rise was different. It wasn't luck, it was destiny. After drifting through odd jobs and even modeling gigs, he stumbled into acting almost by accident. And yet, the moment the camera found him, it was like he had been born for the spotlight. Then came Maverick in 1957, the role that would change everything. At first glance, it was just another Western. But Garner didn't play Brett Maverick like a typical gunslinger. No, his Maverick was sly, quick-witted, and charming enough to con anyone without firing a shot. He was the gambler you wanted to hate but couldn't help rooting for, always one step ahead, always smirking as if he knew something the rest of us didn't. Audiences went crazy. America had never seen a cowboy like this before. Funny, roguish, and dangerously magnetic. Women adored him, men admired him, and critics couldn't deny that something about James Garner was just different. He wasn't trying to be a star, he just was. And while fans were glued to their TVs, behind the scenes, something else was happening. Garner wasn't content to just play the role. He studied scripts, pushed for more wit, and made Maverick into his character. This wasn't a studio manufactured product. This was James Garner's natural charisma breaking through. But here's the scandal. The very role that made him a household name would also set him on a collision course with the same studio that built his career. Because James Garner wasn't just a cowboy on screen, he was about to become one in real life, taking on Hollywood itself. When Maverick turned him into a TV superstar, Hollywood executives thought they could control him, slot him into safe roles, and cash in on his charm. But Garner wasn't built for a leash. He wanted more, and he went after it. By the early 1960s, he exploded onto the big screen, and his timing couldn't have been more perfect. In The Great Escape, 1963, he held his own alongside icons like Steve McQueen. In fact, some critics whispered that Garner's calm, clever performance stole the show. He wasn't loud, he wasn't flashy, but he had that dangerous mix of cool confidence and raw humanity that audiences couldn't look away from. From there, he proved unstoppable. Romantic comedies like The Thrill of It All showed his softer side, while Grand Prix proved he could carry a high-octane drama. He could be the heartthrob, the hero, the everyman, or the rebel, all in the same decade. That versatility was rare, and it scared the industry. Garner didn't fit neatly into Hollywood's boxes, and that made him unpredictable. And here's what kept people talking. While other actors desperately protected their image, Garner didn't care about playing perfect. He was authentic, sometimes brutally so. He joked about marriage, admitted to mistakes, and talked like a regular guy, not a movie god. That honesty made him relatable, but it also made him dangerous in a town built on illusions. Garner wasn't just conquering Hollywood, he was quietly rewriting what it meant to be a leading man. And soon, his willingness to speak out would put him at the center of one of Hollywood's most shocking battles. For most actors in the 1960s, going up against the studios was suicide. These were billion-dollar machines that controlled careers, reputations, even personal lives. If you crossed them, they could bury you. But James Garner wasn't built to bow down. When Warner Brothers tried to lock him into unfair contracts and treat him like a disposable asset, he did something almost unthinkable. He sued them. Hollywood insiders thought it was career suicide. The studio had money, lawyers, and a reputation for crushing anyone who dared fight back. But Garner stood his ground. He didn't just win, he set a precedent. That courtroom victory cracked open the doors for actors' rights in Hollywood, showing that even the biggest studios could bleed if someone was bold enough to strike. And here's what made the scandal even bigger. Garner didn't brag about it. He didn't do press tours or play the victim. He just quietly went back to work, building his career on his own terms. That silence was more powerful than any headline. Hollywood knew now. This wasn't just another pretty face. James Garner was dangerous because he couldn't be controlled. But while Garner was fighting studios and courtrooms, his private life was turning into a story almost more dramatic than anything he played on screen. Hollywood is notorious for quick flings, failed marriages, and scandals that end up on the front page. But James Garner's love story didn't just break the rules, it shocked everyone. In 1956, he met Lois Fleischman at a party. Just 16 days later, they got married. 16 days. In a town where most relationships don't survive a summer blockbuster, Garner bet his entire future on a woman he had barely known for 2 weeks. And against all odds, it worked. Their love wasn't picture perfect. They argued, they separated twice. In 1970 and again in 1979, the cracks looked permanent. Most couples in Hollywood would have called it quits. But somehow Garner and Lois always came back to each other. By 1981, they reunited for good, and when Garner passed away in 2014, they had been together for nearly 58 years. The secret? Garner once joked that marriage was like the army. Everybody complains, but most people re-enlist. It was blunt, funny, and painfully honest, exactly what fans loved about him. And the story only gets more surprising. When they married, Lois already had a daughter recovering from polio. Garner didn't hesitate. He stepped in as a father, patient and devoted. Later, they had their own daughter, and he adored her too. For a man who often played rebels and loners, at home, he was fiercely loyal, protective, and, above all, human. It wasn't glamorous, it wasn't scandal-free, but that's what made it powerful. While other Hollywood marriages fell apart under the spotlight, James Garner's stood as proof that sometimes love built in chaos can actually last. James Garner wasn't just another Hollywood leading man. He was a fighter who turned childhood trauma into strength, a soldier who carried scars into every role, a rebel who challenged the studios and won, and a husband who bet everything on a whirlwind romance that defied the odds. Even when the spotlight faded, he kept living on his own terms, battling pain, surgeries, heart problems, and a stroke with the same grit that made him a star in the first place. And when the end finally came in 2014, at age 86, it wasn't just Hollywood that mourned. It was millions of people who had grown up watching him, who felt like they knew him, who saw a piece of themselves in his honesty. Here's what makes his legacy unforgettable. James Garner never tried to be perfect. He never played by the rules of fame. He wasn't polished, he wasn't fake, and he wasn't afraid to tell the truth, even when it cost him. And maybe that's why his story still matters, because in a world where most stars are manufactured, James Garner was real. And that's why, decades later, we're still talking about him. And maybe, just maybe, that's the greatest role he ever played.